It was colder than usual that morning. The wind slipped through the seams of an old military coat. A man stood still by the iron gate. In his hand, a withered white flower. His worn-out cap hid most of his face. But his eyes, they were fixed on the hall inside, where a grand funeral was about to begin. That day marked a national memorial. General Henry Clayworth had died unexpectedly. The entire country paused for a moment of silence. The honor guard stood in full formation. High-ranking guests filled the grounds. Cabinet members, governors, colonels, reporters, but one man wasn't on the guest list. The man by the gate, Elliot Granger. He had no invitation, no badge, no ID, only a letter and a fading flower. As he tried to step through the gate, a young officer blocked his path. "Where are you headed, sir?" The soldier's voice was firm-trained. Elliot looked up, calm and quiet. "Just here to say goodbye to an old friend." "Are you family, sir?" the officer asked. "No. We served together years ago." "I'm sorry. Your name's not on the list. You can't come in." Elliot didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He just stepped back and waited, still holding tight to that wilted flower. Inside, the music started. The MC began reading names. Everyone was dressed in sharp, polished uniforms, except Elliot, still and silent at the fence, unseen, unnoticed. But that wasn't the hardest part. A middle-aged man approached. He looked Elliot up and down with disdain. "What are you doing here?" Elliot spoke softly. "Saying goodbye." The man scoffed. "And who do you think you are?" Then turned away, without waiting for an answer. No one remembered the name Elliot Granger. No one knew what happened back in 1970. Along the Cambodian border, a mission never recorded. A life saved in silence by the man they now called that old drifter. The wind picked up across the rows of flags. Black ribbons fluttered in the cold air. Elliot stood motionless, eyes locked on the ceremony inside, as if waiting for something. Something not yet arrived. And then it came. From the group of officers, one man stepped forward, fast-paced, eyes wide in disbelief. It was General Jackson Monroe, the direct successor to General Clayworth. He stared at Elliot for a long moment, then turned to his escort and said quietly, "Hold the program. Wait for me," and walked straight toward the iron gate. No one stopped him. No one dared to ask. He stood before Elliot and saluted. A perfect military salute. In front of the entire national audience, the crowd fell silent, confused, watching. Monroe spoke clear and low. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Granger." Elliot's eyes widened, as if he misheard. Monroe continued, "General Clayworth left one request. If you showed up, the urn would be carried by your hands." Elliot stood frozen. His lips trembled. Something cracked open in his chest. At that moment, the iron gate opened slowly. A young officer walked out, carrying an urn. He handed it to Elliot, then stood at attention. And in that still second, the entire national cemetery paused. Not for protocol, not for rank, but for something far more sacred: gratitude and a brotherhood that never needed a name. Elliot took the urn in both hands. The wooden box was heavier than he expected, not because of its weight, but because of what it carried. Inside lay his brother in arms from long ago, Henry Clayworth, the general just laid to rest. But to Elliot, he was still that 22-year-old kid on the border, still trembling as he fired his first shot in the rain. General Monroe walked beside him. He didn't speak, just walked quietly. Two men, two generations of soldiers. One stepped in through history's spotlight, the other through forgotten shadows. But today, they stood side by side, as brothers. The funeral host said nothing. The orchestra fell silent as Elliot approached. The crowd, hundreds of them, rose to their feet. Some even bowed their heads, deep and slow. No one introduced who he was, but with every step, they all felt it. Elliot moved down the center aisle. His worn boots scraped against the white stone. His gaze never wavered. Even as generals and statesmen lined the front row, he didn't bow. He didn't puff his chest. He was just a man keeping a promise. At the altar, he gently placed the urn, right in the center where every eye was drawn. Then he stepped back half a pace, hands folded in front of his jacket. The wind caught his sleeves, made them tremble. But Elliot stood tall, eyes steady. A little boy whispered to his mother, "Mom, who is that man?" The mother paused, searching for words, then simply said, "Someone who mattered very much." In that moment, there were no more name tags, no more stars, stripes, or ranks, only gratitude. Standing still in the wind. Gratitude for those who go unnamed. After the ceremony, guests were invited inside. But Elliot stayed back. He didn't belong in velvet rooms, didn't care for polished wine glasses. He preferred shade and open skies, so he stayed on the edge, like he had his whole life, quiet, unseen. A young officer walked toward him, notebook in hand. "Sir, I'm sorry about earlier today." Elliot gave a slight nod. No bitterness, no blame. The boy fumbled for words. Were you a hero, sir?" Elliot chuckled softly, very softly. "I was just a man who did the right thing. Not a hero. Just right." Then Elliot walked toward the nearest tree. He sat on an old stone bench by the hill, kicked off his boots, rubbed his aching knees. The wind swept across the golden grass. Leaves danced like letters with no address. Elliot stared into the distance, expecting nothing. Because in his heart, what needed to be said had been said. But what Elliot didn't know was that something still waited for him. 3 days after the solemn funeral, a plain envelope arrived at Elliot's door. No sender, just one line written in neat handwriting. For Mr. Granger, the man no one remembered. Inside was a full-color blueprint. At the top, the official seal of the Clayworth Foundation. And one headline stopped his breath. Elliot Granger, Recovery Center. Elliot read every word slowly. It was a wellness center for forgotten veterans, a place where no paperwork was needed, where no one asked, "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" They only asked, "Are you still hurting? Are you surviving?" Or just existing. In the corner of the blueprint, a small sketch of a memorial garden. No bronze statues, no plaques, just a stone bench under a maple tree. Elliot gently placed his hand on that tree in the drawing. It was the same one he had sat beneath right after Clayworth's funeral. They had preserved that space for others like him, for those who sat in silence, unnoticed, unnamed. That evening, he dialed the number at the bottom. General Monroe answered, his voice low, steady, and warm. "I knew you'd read the letter. We're just doing what's right. You don't have to give a speech. You don't even have to come. Just know that door will always be open." Elliot stayed silent for a long moment, then spoke softly. "All right, but don't put my name up big. I'm not someone special." Monroe chuckled quietly, a smile in his tone. "That's exactly why. Your name matters." 3 months later, the center opened quietly, just outside a small town near Richmond, Virginia. No flags, no ribbon cutting, no cameras, just a few faded signs that read, "Welcome to those who were never welcomed." Elliot arrived early, just like always. Dust clung to his boots, that same worn bag on his shoulder, and a white lily in his hand already wilting. No one greeted him at the gate, but he didn't need anyone to, because this time he belonged. No badge, no paperwork, no one asking, "Who are you?" He walked slowly through the courtyard, took in the sights: a tiny library, a music therapy room, a free coffee stand tucked near the lavender bushes. A one-legged veteran played guitar in the shade. A young woman helped him relearn how to walk. No reporters, no interviews, just people beside people. No ranks, no medals, no one above, no one below. Elliot made his way to the garden behind the main building. And there it was, the maple tree, just like in the blueprint, its canopy wide. The breeze whispered like it was calling someone home. Beside it, a stone bench with a single engraved line, "For those the world forgot." Elliot sat down, didn't say a word. He looked around, just taking it all in, and in that quiet, there was no pain, no heaviness, just peace, the kind that comes when you're finally understood. The center slowly began to fill. At first, just a few older veterans. Some came with canes, some in worn-out wheelchairs. Some bore scars on their heads and chests, and others carried wounds no one could see. They didn't say much the first day, just looked around and sat in silence. But little by little they began to open up, not with words, but with presence. One man stayed behind to stack chairs. Another trimmed a buddy's nails, his hands too shaky. Someone warmed a pot of tea for a vet who couldn't sleep at night. No one filmed any of it. No headlines, no applause. But the rooms felt warmer, the air lighter, the silence softer. Elliot became the most regular presence. He arrived early every morning, wiped down every wooden table himself, straightened each crooked book on the shelf. But he never joined the therapy rooms, never once told his story. Not until one rainy afternoon, a young man showed up alone. His name was Troy, freshly discharged, a long stitch still healing across his wrist. Troy didn't speak to anyone, didn't eat, just sat on a bench in the hallway, staring. Elliot sat beside him, said nothing. They sat there for nearly an hour and a half. Rain drummed gently on the rusted tin awning. Then Troy spoke, voice low and cracked. "Did you ever want to disappear?" Elliot didn't answer right away. He watched the rain, then finally said, "I disappeared back in '73. Nobody noticed." Troy looked up, eyes wide. "Then what?" he asked. Elliot replied, "I survived, but I wasn't living, just drifting, like a shadow." Troy sat still for a while, then asked again, "Why'd you come back?" Elliot smiled, eyes just a little wet. "Because I realized someone still remembered. From that day, Eliot began to share his stories, not in lectures, not from a podium, but in fragments over cups of tea. His stories were short, never heroic, just little truths no one had heard before. Troy returned every day after breakfast. He brought a notebook. One morning, he asked, "Do you mind if I write these down?" Eliot nodded, no hesitation. Write them down. For the ones who never got to hear. A month later, the center held a small gathering. Just 20 people. Nothing fancy. Troy stood up and read a passage from that rainy day. There was a night in the Laotian jungle. A retreat. A kid, barely out of high school, shaking like a leaf. We held each other. Not for courage, but because our hands needed other hands. That night, all we needed was a human touch. The room fell still. One man in the front row broke into tears. A young woman turned away to wipe hers. No one asked who they were. It didn't matter. Because in that story, everyone saw a piece of themselves. After that, more people came. More voices. More listeners. More notes passed down. A small monthly journal was born. No news. No ads. No headlines. Just one title. We Were There. And beneath it, smaller words, written down so no one is ever forgotten. News of the center spread faster than anyone expected. A small article went viral overnight. Its headline made people pause. A healing place that doesn't ask for medals. Below the title, a blurry photo of Eliot, wiping a wooden table beneath the big maple tree. No pose, no glance at the camera, just an old man quietly doing what needed to be done. The next day, more reporters showed up. TV crews gathered outside the gates. They waited, hoping to interview the founder, but they weren't looking for Monroe, not even Troy. They were after the mysterious Mr. Eliot Granger. Eliot knew, but he never stepped outside. He just kept wiping tables and rearranging books like always. Others in the center turned the press away. They told them, he doesn't need a spotlight. He's already been forgotten once. That's enough. That evening, Monroe called, his voice steady, but carrying weight. Eliot, they want to give you the Medal of Honor. Eliot was quiet for a long time, then asked softly, why now? Monroe paused, then answered quietly, because they finally know who you are. Eliot's voice barely moved the air. I never wanted them to. The ceremony, he turned it down many times. But in the end, he came. Not out of pride, but because of one line. At the bottom of Clayworth's letter, if they ever remember, you don't hide again. The ceremony was held in a small hall. No lights, no screens, just 40 people in the room. All of them had once sat quietly, listening to his stories. Troy gave the opening speech. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't save just one person. He saved many, not with a gun, but by staying. Eliot was called to the stage. He walked slowly, a soft drag in his step, the same old scarf around his neck. No uniform, no medals, just a man who once did the right thing. General Monroe, his old friend, stood beside him. He didn't say much, just one line. We're sorry it took this long. Then pinned the medal on Eliot's chest. Eliot nodded. No speech. No thank you. Just one quiet bow. And he stepped down. Afterward, a young reporter approached him later. She asked gently, why didn't you say anything? Eliot looked at her. No anger, no shame, just truth. Because I screamed in the jungle for 3 years. And no one heard me. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't need to. Some answers aren't for explanation, only understanding. The final night at the center. That night, Elliot sat alone beneath the old maple tree. The wind was colder now. First whispers of winter. He placed a notebook on the bench, the one Troy had given him. He flipped through the pages. Each one carried a piece of him. Elliot, the storyteller who never wanted the stage. Elliot who wiped tables instead of taking credit. Elliot who made others believe their story mattered too. He chuckled, a soft laugh to himself. Well, not bad for an old man, huh? He tapped the wooden bench with his fingers, then turned and walked slowly into the shadows. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was going. But behind him, they were all there, one by one, the people from the center, standing in the courtyard. No claps, no cheers, no words, just standing, just watching. Each of them nodding once, because sometimes the truest thank you doesn't need to be spoken. That winter passed quickly. The center still opened every morning. But Elliot no longer came each day. His health had begun to fade, yet the wooden table he once sat at still stood in its place. No one ever sat there again. No rules, no signs, just an unspoken understanding. Troy's notebook was published as a book. Its title was simple, I Just Wipe Tables. It was given out freely at veteran clinics, mailed to anyone who had ever worn a uniform. The book didn't speak of medals, or epic battles, or state-of-the-art weapons. It told the stories of those who made it back alive, and how they learned to simply keep breathing. An early spring morning, a small note appeared on the center's wooden bulletin board. Handwritten, no logo, no print. Mr. Elliot Granger passed peacefully last night. There was no grand funeral, no music, no speeches, just a quiet gathering beneath the old maple tree. Each person brought only one thing, not flowers, not candles, not sympathy cards, just a folded handkerchief, placed beside the stone bench where Elliot used to sit. A new line had been carved beneath that bench. He was here, and we heard him. A young woman passed out books at every table. An old veteran retold the very first story. A retired soldier sat in silence and nodded. No one cried out loud. No one made a scene, but in their eyes, you could see the quiet words being said. We'll carry this silence with us. A lesson for the noisy world. In a world too loud, it's easy to miss the one standing quietly behind the scenes. The diner server, the security guard, the old man carrying groceries home every evening. Not everyone wants to be noticed. Not everyone needs a headline, but everyone has a story worth telling. Maybe no one ever asked them. Elliot Granger never stood behind a podium. He never held a mic, never made it on TV, but he made a generation stand taller. Not because he was a general, but because he listened. So if you ever see someone doing something kind quietly, don't wait until they're gone to be grateful. Ask them today, how are you doing, sir? Let them know I'm here. I'm listening. Because sometimes the simplest nod is the only way to say, I haven't forgotten you.